If you were told your green card case was basically frozen, that a policy memo out of USCIS headquarters had quietly made approval almost impossible for you, I need you to stop scrolling for the next few minutes, because what I'm about to show you is going to change how you think about your case. I have real, on-the-record approvals from this past week that directly contradict what most attorneys and most YouTube channels are telling you right now. And one of them involves a country that is supposed to be completely locked out of the system. All right, everyone, let's talk about some updates to this USCIS policy memo that many people have been worried about, and also a quick update on the 39-country ban for immigration benefits from within the United States. I recently covered that issue and noted that USCIS is not fully complying in practice. There have been several encouraging developments on both issues, and I took notes on my phone because we've recently seen a wave of approval notices in adjustment of status cases. Before I read these off, let's quickly ground this in what's actually on paper, because the paperwork matters more than the panic. Back on May 21, 2026, USCIS quietly issued Policy Memorandum PM 602-0199, titled, "Adjustment of Status is a Matter of Discretion and Administrative Grace." The very next day, a USCIS spokesperson put out a press statement claiming that, from now on, anyone in the U.S. temporarily who wants a green card must return to their home country to apply, except in extraordinary circumstances. That single sentence is what set off a wave of panic across immigrant communities. But if you actually read the 11-page memo instead of the press release, the phrase "extraordinary circumstances" doesn't even appear in the operative text. Multiple immigration law firms who reviewed the memo in full have said publicly that it doesn't change the underlying law. It just tells officers to document their discretionary reasoning more carefully. And weeks after it was issued, the Department of Homeland Security itself walked the framing back, telling reporters the memo was mainly meant to remind officers of existing policy, with the real focus being on people who overstayed visas or come from countries that are heavy users of public assistance. That gap between the scary headline and the actual memo is exactly the confusion I'm about to clear up with real case outcomes. So, I'm just going to read this off for a minute. We recently had a marriage-based adjustment of status approved for a Ukrainian woman in Oregon. A marriage-based adjustment of status for a Brazilian overstay in New York. Another overstay case, a South African marriage adjustment of status in New York. An Ecuadorian special immigrant juvenile. Most people probably don't know what that is, but it's for kids who've been abandoned, neglected, or abused, entered the U.S. illegally, overstayed for 7 years, just got his green card, and another approval in New York for an Ecuadorian overstay of 5 years who's married to a U.S. citizen. And finally, we just had a marriage-based adjustment of status approved for a Haitian national out of Florida. So that one is particularly important because Haiti is part of those 39 countries, and Florida has been one of the more aggressive places for these USCIS interviews under the USCIS policy memo. And just, a couple months ago, you could turn on the news and see that some people showing up for interviews in some offices like the Miami field office were being detained. It turned out there was more to it. But anyway, this is all pretty promising news. And here's the part that most channels covering this topic are missing entirely. The 39-country hold itself has been legally challenged. On June 5, 2026, a federal judge in the U.S. District Court for the District of Rhode Island struck down 4 separate USCIS policies that had frozen immigration benefit processing for nationals of all 39 travel ban countries, ruling that the freeze violated the Administrative Procedure Act. Final judgment came down on June 11th, and just 1 day later, on June 12th, USCIS published a news release confirming it would follow the court's order, pending possible further judicial review. That is the legal backdrop explaining exactly why we're now seeing approvals for nationals of countries like Haiti. The blanket hold that was supposed to keep those cases frozen indefinitely no longer has the legal footing it did back in January. All of these got approved after this policy memo went into effect within the last week. Actually, we've been seeing other approvals trickling in, but we just got a ton of them. So, I don't know if something's happening internally with USCIS with regard to the policy memo, but in most field offices, the officers are not even applying the memo. There are a couple notable exceptions, and the pattern is worth watching closely, especially if you have the option to apply now or later. In those instances, they tend to focus on denying people who've overstayed. But in these examples I just gave, most of those were visa overstays. Not all, but at least half of them, or like 60% of them, were visa overstays who applied for adjustment of status. Most of them were through marriage to a U.S. citizen, and the cases got approved. And that Haitian case out of Florida goes to show that the 39-country ban is no longer in effect, at least in some field offices. I'll wait till we have a little more information before saying this broadly throughout the United States. This is all very promising news. It's worth remembering the scale of what's actually sitting in that backlog right now, too. USCIS reported roughly 720,000 pending I-485 adjustment of status cases earlier this year, with an average wait time north of a year. So when you hear that offices are quietly approving cases again instead of sitting on them, that matters for a huge number of families, not just the handful of examples I'm reading off tonight.
So, just yesterday, there was a case involving a mother who entered the U.S. as a tourist. And the family was saying, we were literally about to abandon the process and move the case to the consulate abroad. I'm not going to say what country or any identifying information because no permission was given. But, the case just ended up getting approved. So the call was scheduled, and that day the I-130 and I-485 got approved right before the call. Otherwise, that call would have been about filing an I-824 to transfer the case to the consulate because the stress had become overwhelming. And that's completely understandable. This is all very much designed to increase stress and risks associated with applying for affirmative immigration benefits in the United States. That's really the name of the game here. That story is the one I want you to sit with, honestly, because it captures exactly what's happening across the country right now. Families are being pushed toward giving up, toward abandoning perfectly legitimate cases out of fear generated by press statements and policy memos that, when you actually dig into the details and the court rulings behind them, are far less absolute than they're being made out to be. That doesn't mean the risk isn't real. Officers in some offices absolutely are applying heightened scrutiny, and the discretionary framework in that May 21st memo gives them real room to deny cases they might have approved a year ago. But harder is not the same thing as impossible, and the approvals I've read off tonight prove that. So anyway, this is all very promising, and I wanted to give a quick update on what's happening with these specific cases and the trends we're seeing nationwide. The broader takeaway is that the situation may be changing from office to office, and more information will be needed before drawing firm conclusions. That's the update for now, and these developments will continue to be watched closely as more cases are approved or challenged. If your case has been sitting because you were scared off by a headline, or because your attorney told you it was hopeless, this is exactly the moment to get a second opinion. Drop your situation in the comments, subscribe so you don't miss the next update, and I'll keep pulling these approval notices as they come in, office by office, case by case, for as long as this keeps developing.